السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الفاتحة بنية تعلم وتعليم وتذكر وتذكير ونفع والاندفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله والدعاء إلى الهدى والدلالة على الخير ابتغاء وجه الله ومرضاته وقربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى، وعلى ما نوى نبينا سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم، وعلى ما نوى سلفنا الصالحين، وعلى ما المؤلف أحمد بن زين الحبشي وشيخنا الحبيب أحمد بن عبد الحبشي بن عبد الخليل سلفنا هذهم، وأعمالنا في أعمالهم، وأخلاقنا في أخلاقهم، وطريقتنا في طريقتهم المقبول، وإلى حضرة النبي سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. سورة الفاتحة. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. رب اغفر لي ولوالدي وللمؤمنين آمين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد الفاتح لما أغلق والخاتم لما سبق ناصر الحق بالحق الهادي إلى صراطك المستقيم وعلى آله وصحبه حق قدره ومقداره العظيم. اللهم افتح لنا اللهم افتح لنا اللهم افتح لنا سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا صلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم. So today inshallah we will carry on with Zakat al-Fitr, in which what will be the second last section on Zakat. So inshallah we carry on from where Habib Ahmad bin Zain goes on to say, وإلى قال رضي الله عنه وزكاة الفطر واجبة على كل مسلم إذا فضلت عن قوته وقوت من يقوته يوم العيد وليلته، وهي 4 أمداد بمد النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. Okay, so the translation is as per Zakat al-Fitr has to be paid by every Muslim who possesses more than what he and his dependents need on Eid day and the evening preceding it, and its amount is 4 muds of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's about 750 grams plus or minus. Okay. Okay, so the textual basis of the obligation of Zakat al-Fitr is this hadith narrated by Sayyidina Ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma, who said that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam enjoined Zakat al-Fitr, a sa' of dates or a sa' of barley, upon the free person and the slave, male and female, young and old among the Muslims. He commanded that it be given before the people went out to the Eid prayer. Okay, so this sa' is equivalent to 4 muds. Okay, so roughly this is equivalent to 2.75. Okay, according to certain calculations, right? So it's anywhere between, the calculations fluctuate. There are different ways of calculating and the different standards that they take. So the calculations vary from somewhere like 2.03 liters to 2.03, so a bit more than 2 to 3 kilos. Okay, that being the weight or the quantity of 4 mud, which is equivalent to 1 sa'. So that in the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ uses the unit sa'. Okay, in this hadith, it's called zakat this zakat is called zakat al-Fitr, right? Because it is connected to Ramadan. Okay, so it is the opening fast, the opening of the opening. Fitr means to open, to split. Okay, to open, i.e., breaking fast lah, opening the fast. But in this case, zakat al-Fitr is the breaking of the fast of Ramadan, of the whole month, the end of the month. Okay. Alternatively, some people also call it zakat al-Badan, because it is paid on one's body. Okay, it's paid on the person. Yeah, the importance of this zakat al-Fitr is that it compensates for shortcomings in the fast. Okay, shortcomings that do not amount to breaking one's fast. Okay, the compensation for these shortcomings is by paying the zakat al-Fitr. So some ulama, they say that this zakat al-Fitr is to the fast, in relation to the fast, is the same as the sujud as-sahw. Right? The prostration of forgetfulness is to the prayer. So with regards to the prayer, if we forget some things, or we neglect, we omit, or we leave some sunnahs, some of the main sunnahs, okay, not a fard, not an integral. If we leave some sunnahs, then for some other reasons, then we, for example, we forget, or we mix up the place of a rukun. Okay. Okay, so for some shortcomings such as this, then we compensate, okay, these human feelings by performing the prostration of forgetfulness, sujud sahw. Okay, so that covers the defects in the prayer. Okay, so this zakat al-Fitr is wajib, and there's also an important wisdom that is attached to it, which is to help compensate for defects or shortcomings in our, not defects or shortcomings, in our fast, inshallah. So as if you remember, also last week I mentioned the story of the scholar and saint Habib Abdullah bin Hussein bin Tahir, he had a dream, and he saw in his dream that his fast of Ramadan, his Ramadan fast, was stuck floating in the air, unable to ascend to the heavens. Right? Radiallahu anhu. And then he realized that his servant had given the zakat al-Fitr, his zakat, which he had entrusted to his servant to dispense to the deserving party, right, or parties. The servant had given it wrongly, right? Given it to somebody who had not deserved it, and therefore his zakat al-Fitr had not been considered to be paid, and therefore his fast was still, could not ascend to the heavens. Right? So the zakat al-Fitr is something that is very is very important. Okay, so with regards to times of payment, there are 5 different categorizations. One is the time of obligation, right, when it is obligatory to pay it. Okay, the time of wujub, of it being compulsory. Okay, this is the time that is on the transition, right, from the last part of Ramadan into the first part of Shawwal. Okay, so at this point it is wajib to pay it. Okay, this is a time of obligation, i.e. from the transition before Maghrib of Ramadan, of the last day of Ramadan, right, until Maghrib, and after Maghrib, which is the first part of Shawwal. Okay, so in this case, one is obliged if one is as you transition from the end of Ramadan into the beginning of Shawwal, which begins at the Maghrib, right, on the last day of Ramadan, So with that Maghrib, Shawwal begins. Okay, if in that at that time, right, one is in a state of obligation to pay zakat. Okay, one fulfills the conditions, which we'll cover shortly. One fulfills the conditions to pay the zakat at sunset on the eve of Eid al-Fitr. Okay, i.e. at the time of entry into Shawwal at that time of Maghrib. Okay, if one fulfills those conditions, then zakat is wajib on that person. Okay. However, zakat is not wajib if these conditions exist only in one of the 2 months. Okay, so the focus is on this transition from, that means one is being in a state of obligation from the time of Ramadan into the time of Shawwal. Okay, and zakat is not wajib if the conditions exist only in either month. So for example, it might exist only in Shawwal. Okay, only in Shawwal but not in Ramadan. So i.e. after Maghrib, after the azan of Maghrib, after the time for Maghrib comes in, and we are now technically in the first Shawwal, the eve of Eid. Some state of affairs comes to pass, right? For example, maybe one gets a child. Okay, so the child is just born, a newborn arrives, or someone gets married. Right? Just after Maghrib, one takes on a wife, or someone converts to Islam. Okay, or one suddenly finds wealth. Okay, one suddenly comes into possession of some wealth. Okay, so in this case, zakat is not wajib on these people. Okay, if these conditions exist only in 1 month, in Shawwal, for example, i.e. the newborn, right? That newborn did not exist. The person of that newborn, the baby, did not exist before entering Shawwal. Right? It only existed once one entered Shawwal. So that the zakat is not wajib for that child. Or the new wife, for example. So before Maghrib, right, before entering Shawwal, that this lady is not your wife, and then after entering Shawwal, right, one gets married to her, the zakat is not wajib. The zakat is not wajib on you, right, on the husband to pay. Right? Or a new Muslim. So if somebody comes into Islam before Maghrib, was not Muslim, after Maghrib then took his shahada or his shahada, right, then zakat is not wajib on this person. Okay? Or newly found wealth. So for example, before that one did not have the means to pay zakat, did not fulfill the financial conditions, and then after this, suddenly after Maghrib, one is somebody comes up and gives you a bunch of notes, for example, right? Suddenly you are able to pay zakat. It's still not wajib to pay zakat. Okay, so that is when it exists in either month, and that example is when it exists when these conditions which make the zakat an obligation upon you exist in one month only, not in both months. So just now I gave the example of these conditions existing in Shawwal but not in Ramadan. Alternatively, they might exist in Ramadan but not in Shawwal. So for example, something happens before Maghrib, before the time of entry, before the sunset into the entry into Shawwal, right? Something happens. So for example, a man dies before sunset on the last day of Ramadan. So in this case, it is not wajib. It's not an obligatory for his inheritors to pay zakat on his behalf. Okay, so this time of payment, what we're talking about is a time where something is, it involves a transition. Okay, it's based on a transition between Ramadan to Shawwal. So the second type of time, okay, during which one can pay one zakat is the meritorious time. Okay, when is this time? This time is on Eid day, right, between the arrival of Fajr and before the Eid prayer. Okay, so the time after the adhan of Fajr comes in, and before the Eid prayer, this is the time that is considered best to pray. In fact, the best is after the Fajr prayer. Okay, after the Fajr prayer, before the Eid prayer. Okay, so this is considered the best time to pay the zakat. Right? What is the permissible time? Right? That is the time that is from the first day of Ramadan. Okay, there are certain exceptions, but generally it is from the first day of Ramadan, right, until the Eid prayer. Okay, so this time this whole time it is permissible. So one can immediately when Ramadan enters, one can pay one's zakat. Right? It is permissible. Okay. Fourthly, the disliked time or makruh time. Right? What is makruh? It is the time that is after the Eid prayer, right, on the day of Eid until sunset. So that time, if one pays during that time, then the ruling of it is makruh. It is a time that is disliked, okay, to delay the zakat payment until that time. Okay. Unless there are exceptions to this, unless the delay is because one is made to wait, one wants to pay the zakat to a close kin family, or to a pious person, and one cannot get hold of that person. Okay, so if there are excuses, then it is not. There is no karaha. It is not makruh. Okay, finally, the forbidden time is to pay after the sunset on Eid day. Okay, meaning the day of Eid has passed. Okay, the reason is that Eid is meant to be a joyous occasion, and so we're supposed to be disbursing the property that belongs to these people. This should be given to them on that day so that they can use it. Okay, so to pay after sunset on Eid day is a sin. Okay, it's haram, right? Unless there is again a valid excuse. So, for example, somebody is waiting for his means with which he wants to pay the zakat. That money has not arrived. Yeah, or one is still searching for people who are deserving of the zakat. Yeah, in this case, then it is not. It is still haram, but there is no sin. Yeah, and one has to make up that payment as soon as possible. I.e., one has to still, right, whether or not one has an excuse, right, the makeup has to be done as soon as possible. Okay, it remains outstanding on the person until one pays zakat. Okay, so that's with regards to the times of payment of the zakat al-Fitr. Okay, so now with regards to conditions of obligation of zakat al-Fitr, i.e., if these conditions are fulfilled, then the one who fulfills these conditions, it is wajib for this person to pay the zakat al-Fitr. Okay, or zakat al-Badan. Okay, first and second, in fact, it should be a free person, okay, i.e., not a slave, a free Muslim. Okay, so it's not a slave, right, and a Muslim, i.e., not a kafir, not a non-Muslim, right, not a kafir. Although the kafir is responsible, the non-Muslim is responsible for the zakat of his Muslim dependents, his kin, or if he has a slave. Okay, these are in the earlier text. So he's Muslim, then he is responsible to pay the zakat. Okay, so thirdly, this is the third condition. He's free, he is a Muslim, and thirdly, he has the necessary amount of food, which is the 4 mud. Okay, 4 muds on the eve and the day of Eid. Okay, so just now we were talking about the times for paying. Right, so if one has this necessary amount of food, okay, on the eve, which is the amount that is the zakatable amount per person. Okay, if one has this amount of food on the eve of Eid and the day of Eid, meaning if today is the day of Eid, right, then considering from last night Maghrib, we would have entered the time of Eid, the eve of Eid. Okay, so the third condition is that one has the necessary amount of food, right, on the eve and day of Eid, provided that it is in excess, right, it is beyond, okay, what one needs to feed and clothe oneself and the dependents one is obliged to support. Okay, meaning one has enough to feed oneself, to clothe oneself, right, as well as the dependents is wajib upon one to support, right, upon me to support. I have enough to feed myself, to clothe myself, right, and the people who I am obliged to support, right, financially. Beyond that, I still have some more wealth, right? And then I will pay the zakat al-Fitr. Okay, with regards to who one is obliged to support, right? These include one's wife, one's parents, right? Parents of the wife of the husband, okay, regardless of religion, right? Parents and parents and so on, parents and so on upwards, right? One's children and children's children, right? Grandchildren and grandchildren's children, and so on downwards. Okay, so all these are the people one is obliged to support, right? But this only applies when in the event that there is poverty, right, and they are incapable of supporting themselves. Okay, so incapable of supporting themselves. So if they are able to support themselves, then there is no obligation, right, on another person to support a person who is able to support themselves. Okay, even if it's family. Okay, the principle of it, right? The principle to this, right? The principle is that one is responsible, right, to pay the zakat al-Fitr for every person whom one is legally responsible to support. So if I am legally responsible to support my wife, then I'm also legally responsible to pay the zakat al-Fitr for my wife. Right? If I'm legally responsible, the responsibility of supporting, I have the responsibility of supporting my wife, my mother, my father, my wife and my child, for example, then I have to pay the zakat. It's on me. It's wajib on me to pay the zakat of my wife and my child. Okay. Similarly for parents, as I mentioned earlier, right? So father's father, mother as well, and upwards and downwards, both ways. Okay, the exception to this, right? When do I not have to pay zakat for these people, right? I do not have to pay zakat for my father's wife. So my father takes on another wife who is not my mother, right? I am not obliged to pay the zakat for her, zakat al-Fitr for her, although I'm obliged to support her financially if she requires it. Yeah, so I'm not obliged to pay the zakat, but I'm obliged to support her. Yeah. And then one is also the exception. Another exception is if one has a kafir non-Muslim slave or kafir close kin, like family member, not immediate family, right? Or rather even immediate family, kin, close kin, or a non-Muslim wife. So a non-Muslim slave, kin, or wife. So these, and my father's wife. Okay, so these people, I do not have to. I'm not obliged to support. I'm not obliged to pay the zakat on their behalf. Yeah. So that's one condition, or rather that is the provision, okay, for having the necessary amount of food on the eve and day of Eid. The first provision is that I have that amount, right, and that amount must be more than what I need to feed and clothe myself and the dependents who I am obliged to support. Right? And it also must be in excess of what I owe other people. Okay, meaning it must be more than the amount that I owe other people, even if these debts are not even due yet. Okay. So if one has debts, and to the total amount of the debts means that I will not have this necessary amount of food, right? Then it's not obliged for me to pay zakat. Okay, so my rent and my housekeeping expenses, right? Housing and housekeeping. Housekeeping actually refers to a servant. Okay. Right, so if what I have is in excess of these three these three essentials, right, then I am obliged to pay the zakat al-Fitr. Otherwise, I'm not obliged to pay the zakat al-Fitr. So with regards housing and housekeeping, i.e. a servant to help with house chores, for example, this is when the housing and the housekeeping, when these expenses are the level of housing and the level of housekeeping are suitable to the person. Yeah, so if it is beyond suitable, right, is excessive or lavish, then one has to pay zakat. Okay, so this suitable is rather subjective. Yeah, but I mean it doesn't leave it doesn't leave very much to the imagination what is sufficient for a human. Okay, so if it's beyond that level, then one has to pay zakat. Okay, if one's property is insufficient, so in the event that one's property is sufficient and beyond all of these, beyond these three provisions, right, in excess of these three provisions, then one has to pay the zakat, right? And if it is insufficient, then one is obliged to pay the zakat al-Fitr, right, to the extent that one can. So if one can pay part of it, then one pays part of it. So one pays first one's own one's own wajib zakat, right, and then that of one's wife, or one's young child, one's father, one's mother, and then one's adult son. So in this order. Okay, adult son is if he is without an income lah, if he cannot support himself. Okay, or for example if he's ill, chronically ill or insane. Yeah, otherwise one is not obliged to support him. Okay, if he is able to find means to support himself, one is not wajib for me to pay the zakat of the adult son. Okay, for the father to pay the zakat of the adult son. Okay, so that's if it is insufficient. But if it is sufficient, okay, then the amount is 1 sa', okay, which is 4 mud of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam per head. Okay, so it's 4 mud per head. Okay, per individual. Okay, if you fulfill the requirements above, right? So 4 mud is about 2.75 kilos up to 3 kilos. In some calculations. So I mean, giving 3 kilos a head would be best. Right? Would be more in line with being circumspect, with being more careful, right? That one should make sure that one fulfills the requirement. Right? To go beyond it is better than it's okay, but not to fall below it. Okay, so up to some according to some calculations, it's up to 3 kilos. Okay, and this must be in the main staple of the area in which that zakat is given. This must be the main staple of the area in which this zakat is given. Okay, so one must give food. One must give food that is staple in the area most of the year, and not only at the time of the obligation to pay zakat. That's one. Yeah. So the staple food that is a staple is considered a staple most of the year, right? And that is the food that one must pay zakat with, right? Not if, for example, there are a few kinds of staple foods and during Eid time, for example, we only have a certain kind of maybe at somewhere during Eid time, it's a certain kind of food becomes a staple. Okay, one cannot take that as the basis, right? As the food with which one pays one zakat. One has to take the food that is the staple most of the time, most of the year. Okay, that's number one. Secondly, giving the equivalent of money will not suffice. Okay, so instead of paying 4 mud, instead of paying 2.75 kilograms, I give maybe $3, maybe I don't know, $9 or $10, right? If it's an equivalent, right, to 2.75 kilos of rice, for example. Okay, because in this region we tend to use rice, right? Rice is a staple food. Okay, so it's not enough to give money in place of rice. Okay, some of the scholars, before to follow the Shafi'i madhab, right? There is in one on one hand, there is a recognition that people need money more than rice. So then they are free to do what they will with that money, right? But then, which is I suppose the reason, the basis for the other madhabs accepting that, for example, the Hanafi madhab, maybe the Maliki madhab, if I'm not wrong, also accepts that one can give money in place of the staple. Okay, but so on one sense, on one side there is a recognition that money is, the utility is greater than a staple food, right? And then on the other hand, there is the following the text, right, of the tradition. So in the Shafi'i madhab, we are meant to give staple food. Okay, so in this area, for example, it's rice, right? And how the scholars reconcile between these two competing demands, right, or realities, is that, for example, I will go to someone who deserves to receive the zakat, and what I will do is I will bring 1 mud with me of rice instead of 4 muds. I will bring 1 mud, and I will give this person his zakat of 1 mud, right, with the proper, if given that I fulfill all the conditions and with my intention and everything. So I will give the zakat of 1 mud to this person, and then I will buy it back. So he will receive money. After I have given him the 1 mud, I will then buy it back from him. So he will receive the money equivalent of 1 mud, and then I will give him another mud, right? So that's he's received 2 muds, and then I will buy it back again, and so on. For the 3rd time, I will buy it back again, and the 4th time, I will buy it back again, right? Or I might give it together with him, but he will, or rather, at least the point is, I will give him that same mud 4 times. Okay, so in that sense, I have fulfilled the requirement of the Shafi'i madhab, while at the same time reconciling the need for, or the greater utility for, cash, for money that people might have. So that's one way they worked around, or they came up with the scholars came up with a compromise with regards to this thing. Okay, so finally, it's permissible to give, if one wants to give 4 mud, get 2.75 kilograms of the main staple of the area. So as I mentioned, there are different categories of staple. Maybe there are different there are better quality, better and lower quality staples. Right? So it's permissible, it's okay to give the best quality of the staple food that is given, that is eaten in that area, right? Staple food of the area, but not to give less than the usual quality. Okay, or rather, not to give less than the usual quality, and okay, not to give less than the usual quality. Okay, so one can give the best quality, but not less than the usual, not less than the quantity that is given for the usual quality. Okay, so that is with regards the Zakat al-Fitr, conditions of its obligation, right, and the amount that is given. Right, so next week, inshallah, we'll go on to the categories of people who are deserving, right, the recipients of the zakat, inshallah, and wrap up our section on zakat, inshallah. Okay, wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam ala tilfati wa hamdulillah wa rasul salah al-jasadi wa rahmatu wa tanasbah. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله
يا ربنا اعترفنا بأننا اقترفنا وأننا أسرفنا على لظى أشرفنا فضلا وجودا منا لا باكتساب منا بالمصطفى الرسول نحظى بكل سول بالمصطفى الرسول نحظى بكل سول، بالمصطفى الرسول